Sasha's come over to the UK for the first time from New York City. He's done a lot of work in mental health over the years. He was a co-founding member of the Icarus Project, which challenges popular sort of ideas about mental illness and creating a new paradigm for it. And he's done a lot of work around peer support as well, internationally and in the States. So, and yeah, we've got today extreme experiences and challenging the sort of mental illness paradigm, his experiences of doing that. So if I hand over to him.
Thanks, Neil. And Neil, thank you so much for all the organizing you've been doing. So my name's Sasha. This is the first time I'm in the UK. This is I've been in Manchester for about an hour and a half. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be here with you all. We have a very short amount of time together, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for a little while, and I'm going to share some ideas and stories with you, and then I want to have a conversation about it. That's my idea of a good time. I think it's really important, so I'm visiting from the other side of the world, and so I'm the one talking, but I am actually, when I get up and do talks like this, I think about it as I'm here and then I'm actually transmitting the ideas and voices of a whole lot of other people. So I have my own personal stories, but then I have a whole bunch of stories of other people. And I feel like I'm part of a really interesting movement. And I hope there's some kind of key ideas that I'm hoping that you all come away with today. And so that's why I'm showing these slides to kind of give it. But there's this metaphor that my friends and I like to use of the dandelion. So really, one of the ways, and this is part of what keeps my mental health together when I think about making change in the world. I think that there's the mainstream, there's what's happening out when you turn on the television or when you're going and seeing what's happening in the larger culture, and then there's the cultural underground. And I consider myself part of an underground movement. And the reason I like dandelions so much is that dandelions, I don't know how many people have ever grown a garden, but most plants grow in the topsoil. There's a topsoil and the subsoil. And dandelions have these deep taproots that go into the subsoil and pull up nutrients. And in some ways, what I'm doing today is I'm thinking about it as I'm pulling up ideas from the cultural underground to share with you and spread in Manchester. So I'm going to tell you a story, but it's like a story, but it's also a story about a story. So I'm someone, I'll spare you the details, but I grew up in New York City. I'm 44 years old, and what's the way to say it? I'll just come out and say it straight out. When I was 18 years old, the police in New York City found me walking on the subway tracks, and I thought that the world was about to end and that I was being broadcast live on primetime television on all the channels. I thought that there was microscopic transmitters implanted under my skin, recording my thoughts for some top secret branch of the government, and I hadn't slept in a really long time. The police wrestled me to the ground, arrested me, brought me to an underground jail cell. They found my mother, who was terrified. She signed some papers, and I got shot up with some antipsychotic drugs, and then I woke up a couple weeks later in a padded room in a public mental health system. Okay, so that was a really long time ago. That story that I'm telling you, and in between then, over a period of years, I got out, and I'll say it like this. And by the way, I've been giving a lot of talks, and I never say them all the same. It would get really boring if I just said the same thing all the time. So if I'm stopping and I'm thinking of new and interesting ways to tell you this story. I could leave this part out, but I think partly because I'm in Manchester, and for me, like, my associations with Manchester are, there are all these bands from here, from the late 70s and early 80s that had a big influence on me and my friends. Like, I grew up in the punk rock scene in New York City, and there was a bunch of bands that were from here. And the reason I'm telling you this is that when I was a young teenager, I was part of a social movement. Like, New York was, I'm sure Manchester looked really different, in the late 1980s here. New York was like a really different city, and there was this one neighborhood where kids from all over the country would run away from home, and there were abandoned buildings. There were buildings that had been abandoned and burned by their landlords, and people took them over and squatted them. And there was this park that we all hung out in. And, so I spent my teenage years hanging out with anarchists and punks. And the reason why that's important to this narrative is that I was around a whole bunch of people for whom the idea of what it meant, to be normal with my friends that I hung out with was actually, people thought that was crazy. Like, to be normal was crazy. And that the society that we lived in was sick. So when I was 18 and they told me that I had a biological brain disease called bipolar disorder, and that it was a mental illness that I was going to have for the rest of my life, I just told them that they were full of shit. I mean, that's the part that I want you to understand. So the thing is that when I was 26 or 27, I had been locked up in psych hospitals a number of times. And by that point, I kind of realized that there was actually something that was different about me than, it wasn't just that society was crazy. I was actually, I was really sensitive. And the drugs that they were giving me were actually helpful. And it was a very confusing thing within the people that I hung out with. That was a strange idea. And I ended up writing this story. I don't know if this has ever happened to any of you all, but there's this thing about human beings. I don't know if you've ever been brave or crazy enough to put yourself out to the world and tell a story about yourself. But there's this thing that happens, which is that often when you reveal really intense things about yourself, people feel compelled to want to reveal things back. It's it's just a natural human thing, I think. In social psychology, it's actually called self-disclosure. Mutual self-disclosure is this key piece of relationship building. Anyway, when I was 27, I wrote this article, and it was basically telling you the story that I just told you, but then thousands of people read it. And what ended up happening was my inbox was filled with emails from strangers who just wanted to tell me their stories. And what ended up happening was that one person in particular wrote to me, and we started corresponding, and then she and I ended up getting together, and then the night we met, her name was Jax McNamara. She was 22 years old, and we stayed up all night talking, and we decided to start this website called the Icarus Project. So here's the thing about the Icarus Project. When we started it, we wrote this manifesto, and basically what we said, and this is my theme for today, we said, rather than seeing ourselves as diseased or disordered, we see ourselves as having dangerous gifts. In Greek mythology, there's this boy, Icarus, and he has wings, but they're made out of wax and feathers. And he ends up flying too close to the sun and drowning and dies. That's the story of Icarus. So what we said was, people like us who are diagnosed with intense mental illness, we're seen as ill, but there's actually like a whole bunch of different ways that you can look at it. And then one of them is this idea that like actually, you know, like it's a gift. Okay, so that also was like a long ass time ago, what I'm telling you about. And in recent years, I've gotten really interested in thinking about people like myself. Like I'll tell you a little more about like what happened with Icarus, but the idea is that I think that I don't know what it's like here, and I don't know any of you. I don't know what kind of stuff that you've been through in your lives. But where I live, the mainstream, when we talk about, so we were talking about the mainstream and the underground, the mainstream narrative, the mainstream language that we often end up using when we're in this arena is we talk about the stigma, trying to reduce the stigma of mental illness. Is it the same here? Reducing the stigma of mental illness. Yeah, so the thing is, I fucking hate that language. I'm sorry, really. I think it's really, first of all, like, why is it not discrimination? Why is, see, the thing about it, at least where I live, if you're discriminating against someone, there's actually legal ramifications for that. But there's no legal ramifications for stigma. You can stigmatize people all you want. And then the people who are actually, the money for these anti-stigma campaigns, where I live, maybe it's different here, maybe it's the same, it's almost entirely funded by pharmaceutical companies. So they are the ones who are really interested in getting people talking about like reducing the stigma of mental illness. Why? Because if you reduce the stigma of mental illness, then it's not stigmatizing to take psychiatric medication. So I'm just like not into it. I'm just not, like as someone diagnosed with a serious mental illness, I just think that that language is really, there's language that puts you in a box, you know? And that's like the kind of language that puts you in a box. And what I'm interested in is I'm interested in language that pushes the boundaries, okay? So you very well might not agree with everything that I'm saying today, but at least have some respect for the fact that what I'm doing, and when I say I mean like the larger community movement I'm a part of, we are pushing the boundaries. We are, there's, so this is an image from a TV show called Legion, which is, it's an X-Men show, which is, about people with superpowers. And this guy has, in the show, he has telekinesis, meaning he can like move objects by thinking about it. But he in this scene, he like can't control his telekinesis, and the stuff is going everywhere, you know. And I think that there's probably a lot of people who would say, wait, hold on a second. We're talking about mental illness here. Why would you start talking about superpowers? That's actually like, isn't that romanticizing like the kinds of things people go through? Isn't that like actually, creating, like making it potentially more dangerous for people who are delusional to like think like, oh, they have superpowers, and then they start doing things? And my feeling is just like, yeah, sure, that could be a little dangerous, but I'm interested in like pushing the boundaries. I just think that like we could use it. I think as a society we're like so stuck. Like there's a way that how do I say it? I mean, maybe like I also do this thing. I've just been changing my slides around every time I do a presentation because I'm just I'd get really bored if I had to do the same ones all the time. I mean, I think in some ways this is where I'm starting from, and you don't have to start from this place, but I'm suggesting that you do. I get it. I'm suggesting that if we're going to have a conversation about mental illness, that we actually start from the place that the society that we live in is sick. That the society that we live in is sick. And so trying to integrate people back into the society is not a bad thing. Like people need to go to school and go, have jobs. Like that's not a bad thing. But like if that's all we're trying to do, we're like missing a way larger point. And we're missing the fact that like from my perspective, as my friends when I was a teenager used to say, if you're, if you're normal, that actually means there's something wrong with you. It's actually my point is it's okay to be different. And so there's you end up, if you start from that place, you end up with different conclusions. So for example, this is a poster from the Icarus Project from some years ago. I'll read it to you, and maybe it'll resonate with you, or maybe you'll be like, why? Sometimes, so this is about suicide. This is an untraditional, this is not what you're getting in the mainstream of thinking about suicide. Sometimes wanting to kill yourself just means you don't want to live the life that you're living. And you can change your life. You can change your life with that power. What the hell? You were about to lose your whole life. Why not instead lose your school, job, pretenses, fears, adherence to society standards, shame? I found some of my suicidal episodes to be strangely liberating in that way. I wouldn't take back any of what made me who I am today. So that was one person in my community who had some thoughts, about it. And I think that I think that it can be really useful to remember that whatever we believe ends up having a huge effect on us. If we believe that we have a serious mental illness, that's a powerful thing, If we believe that we have dangerous gifts, that's a powerful thing too. I'm not sure how it happened. Maybe it was my thing, but in the title of this talk, I think it originally was extreme experiences, mental illnesses, or dangerous gifts. And I was talking about it with my community, and one of my friends said, why do you have to choose? And I think that's actually, that's part of what I'm hoping you'll come away with today. I hope you'll walk out of here and can realize that you can actually think from a few different perspectives, and they can be seemingly contradictory, seemingly cancel each other out, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. The story gets more interesting and complicated. Oh, okay. So here I'm going to read you. A quote by Jax McNamara, who is my best friend. We started the Icarus Project together. They use they pronouns these days and live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and are married to a really awesome woman, and they just had a kid. But they said this a bunch of years ago, after they'd just been locked up. When we were reflecting, when we were getting to know each other and talking about our experiences being hospitalized. And this is what Jax wrote. It just seemed like the doctors had no visceral knowledge of what I was experiencing. They could anatomize it with all their words they learned in books, the way you anatomize the movement of bones and muscles that allowed a bird to fly, but they had no idea what flight was all about. And I think, for me, I've ended up working in the public mental health system for the last bunch of years, and people use the language of lived experience here, lived experience, and so that language of lived experience, it can, you can have an experience of something and someone else hasn't had that experience, and because you've had that experience, you actually can understand some things that they don't. And I think more and more in the public mental health system, there's this understanding that people who have struggled have a lot to offer, the system. But I think this is a really key point. It's just sometimes clinicians can be really helpful, but if they haven't actually been through what you've been through, they're just gonna know it from books. So my friends and I, we started the Icarus Project, and it grew within a couple within like a year, we had about 1,000 people on our website. And keep in mind, this was like before social media, so we had like a message board. That's what we used back in the old days. Maybe some of you remember. We used message boards, and we were kind of like a magnet for brilliant, awesome, crazy people, and we had these spaces. Like, we had a forum called Alternate Dimensions or Psychotic Illusions, and it was a space for people who had what were considered psychotic experiences to write about it. And then, then there was a bunch of other people who also had experiences, and having that experience of being part of like an emerging community of people, Jackson and I got inspired, and we ended up writing this book called Navigating the Space Between Brilliance and Madness. And really, the idea was we wanted to create a space where we basically wanted to, like, what we were saying at the time was, we want to create a new language and culture for what gets called mental health and mental illness. And so that's what we did, basically, by just compiling a bunch of people's ideas together. And it was popular. I mean, it was popular, and it like sold out really quickly, and we printed some more, and then sold out, and we printed some more. And then, I mean, I think what ended up happening, this one, is basically, the organization started growing. We became a collective. Some other people joined, like, I just met someone here in the front row who knows Will Hall. He was like one of the other people who became part of the Icarus project. But there were a bunch of people, and we ended up making this. There's like a little booklet called "Friends Make the Best Medicine: A Guide to Creating Community Mental Health Support Networks," and it was our attempt to create a guide for people who wanted to start peer-based support groups. And then a lot of groups got started, over a period of time. There were definitely at least a couple hundred in different places. And that was a really powerful thing. Here, I'll go back and show the slide that I showed before. So so I'm going to read what it says. It says, "The word crisis comes from the root meaning judgment. A crisis is a moment of great tension and meeting the unknown. It's a turning point where things can't go on the way they have, and the situation isn't going to hold. Could crisis be an opportunity for breakthrough, not just breakdown? Can we learn about ourselves and each other as a community through crisis? Can we see crisis as an opportunity to judge a situation and ourselves carefully and not just react with panic and confusion or turn things over to the authorities?" So I will revisit this a little later on when we get towards the end. But I think that a huge part of, if you've ever been a part of a community of people who struggle with mental health issues, sometimes people struggle and they end up in crisis. And the question is what do you do? Where do you do we just bring people to the hospital? Or are there ways that we can take care of each other? I mean, for me, part of why I personally really like the language of dangerous gifts, and that why it resonates for me, is this understanding that if you have you can have something, you can but then you need to learn how to use it. You have to learn how to you learn how to take care of yourself. You learn what are the things you need to do every day to take care of yourself, and what are the ways you engage with the world, and what kind of routines do you set up, and all that, all of that stuff. And I just personally I feel like at least where I live, maybe it's the same. Maybe it's, I can't tell. It seems like there's a lot of really similar things, but it also seems like the U.S. the economy is different, and there's a lot of things in the mental health system that have to do with legal liability, that basically lock people up so they don't hurt themselves or hurt someone else, because we'll get in trouble. Anyway. I think it's important to think about when you're building peer support, what is community what does community support look like? I think that I've been lucky enough to have this experience of being in community with a whole bunch of people where we really say it like this. Okay, so if you forget everything I just said, if you're just like, and it's gone, which is likely you won't, try and remember this, because this is actually really, this is really practical. There's a way when you get together with a group of other people and you want to talk, like in the mental health realm, there's some really basic ground rules that can be useful. So here, I'm going to tell you what they are, and we can apply them. We can apply them today. You can test it out and see how it works. So, ground rule number 1. If you take psychiatric drugs or you don't take psychiatric drugs, you're welcome to be a part of the conversation that we're having. I know it sounds small, but it's it can be a big deal, actually. It can open up a lot of space. So whether if you take psychiatric drugs and you find them really helpful or you think they're fucking poison, you're welcome to be a part of the community and conversation. If you use diagnostic categories to define yourself, like schizophrenic or bipolar or clinical depression, or you think all of those labels and definitions are a crock of shit, you're welcome to be a part of the conversation in the community. And finally, there are going to be things where we're going to have really different life experiences, and a really good example is your relationship with your family. Like, maybe you have a really loving, awesome family and they've really been there for you, and that's like one end of the continuum. And then the other end of the continuum is that your family has been so abusive to you and it has been so horrible that you don't even talk to them. And just understanding that that's we're going to come from these different worldviews and to respect those. So there you go. That it's actually, there's other things like when you're in groups of people. Like a really important one is some people feel really comfortable taking up space in a room and feel and feel really just comfortable talking. And then there's other people who are really shy. And it can be really helpful to when you're getting a group of people together to just remind and kind of acknowledge that dynamic and say, if you're someone who talks a lot, notice that you're talking, and step back a little bit and leave some space for people who don't talk as much. This can often there's a gender dynamic to this kind of way of being, and I think that it's just useful to acknowledge and to put out there. It just makes it easier to have conversations with groups. So let's see. So yeah, let's talk about psych drugs for a second. So this is a booklet that was published a number of years ago by the Icarus Project, which is about coming off of psychiatric drugs. And the reason that we decided to make this publication is that there is so much information about going on psychiatric drugs. It's actually more intense where I live. So this is an example where things are a little bit more extreme where I live. Where I live, there's actually they call it direct marketing. That basically you turn on the television set and there's antipsychotic drug ads on TV, which is not legal here, but still. I know from having conversations with a bunch of people in your country that there's a lot of people taking psychiatric drugs. Statistically, there's a chance there's a number of you taking psychiatric drugs. I take psychiatric drugs, and I think it's really important I think there's this grassroots movement to basically, like, it's an empowerment movement to help people figure out how to get off the drugs if they don't want to be on them, or to reduce down and be on smaller amounts. And actually, a year or two after we published this, the American Psychiatric Association, which is like the main trade association for the psychiatrists where I live, published their own version of it, and it was a win, because we were like, we had pressured them, because it's actually really fucked up if you think about it, that there's like so many people on these drugs, and that there's not research studies about coming off of them. And so in recent years, there's a lot more. And Will Hall, who was the main author of this publication, he's continued on this. Is helping to figure out how people can get off drugs. But I guess I'll say on the subject of psych drugs and narratives and the way we think about ourselves. I've been taking a drug called lithium carbonate for like 18 years now. I would like to get off of it, and I'm kind of working my life in such a way to try and work towards that. But I tell you right now, and I say it with a totally straight face, the dominant narrative is that I have a serious mental illness and I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, and that the lithium is like, balancing my chemistry somehow. But I just don't believe that narrative. I just don't think that it's true. And really what I believe is that I have superpowers, and the drugs help me control my superpowers. And that's about as scientifically valid as saying that I have a chemical imbalance. They don't actually have any proof of this chemical imbalance stuff, but I am a very sensitive person, and the drugs make me less sensitive. But I'm still really sensitive, and I think that's the way that I think about it. So that's just in case that's helpful for someone out there. Oh, okay. So this is where the story gets really funny. I'm just sharing. So so that's me, and so I worked for the Icarus Project for 12 years, and then I got a master's in social work, and then I got hired at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, which is the most powerful psychiatric institute in the world, and that's where I've been working for the last 3 years, full time, and up until 2 weeks ago, and then I quit my job and I came here. Seriously, that's what I'm doing here. Actually, is I quit my job, and I got invited by people at Cambridge University to come speak, and they said they'd pay for my plane ticket, and then I was like, well, I don't really have many vacation days left. I think this might be the time. So I organized a 9-city tour, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm traveling around doing this. As an aside, I don't know if this has ever happened to you all, but I do have this kind of thing where I'm totally into this. I'm having a great time. I'm even with the rainy weather, I'm just oh, Manchester in the rain, this is how it's supposed to be, whatever. But there is this part of me that I woke up and was holy shit, who organized a 9-city tour? Do you ever do that? Do you have one part of you that's let's do this, and then another part that's anyway. So I spent the last 3 years working at this place, and they actually put me in charge of developing training programs for peer specialists. Do you all know, do you use that language, peer specialists here? Peer workers, peer support workers. It's better than peer specialists anyway, but it's an oxymoron to call someone a peer specialist. But what's that?
Sorry, yes it is.
There we go, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the contradictions in the last bunch of years of my life have been incredibly taxing, incredibly toxic and taxing to my system. I learned this great term that's been really helpful to me. Maybe it'll be helpful to you. It's a term from sociology, a polyvalent concept. Are you familiar with this term? Polyvalent concept. Okay, so here's what a polyvalent concept is. A polyvalent concept is an idea that has multiple stakeholders that are superficially agreeing on the idea, but they all actually have different ideas of what it means. It's a way of kind of like pushing things forward. But then what inevitably happens is that the stakeholders who have the most power end up being the ones who dictate what it actually means. So
could you just repeat the words?
Polyvalent concept. It's like, so Polyvalent. So like a great example of a polyvalent concept is recovery. Are people familiar with this word recovery? Oh, recovery. It's like the ultimate. Actually, my job title at this place, I was the recovery specialist and trainer. That was my title. And you know, to the idea of recovering from the idea of like you're ill and then you recover from being ill. It can be very empowering. It can be very empowering to recover, to use that language. But man, it sure is like where I was working for the past 3 years. Like the people who are in power, the people who are the ones who are making decisions. That like recovery means, it basically means how can we spend less money? How can we spend less money on people? How can we get them to recover so we don't have to support them? So that's fucked up, right? Yeah, it's fucked up. There's a bunch of polyvalent concepts. Shared decision making, that was like a one in my. So I was working. My main job, I had a couple of them, but my main job was working at in an early intervention. I developed I trained a whole bunch of peers who worked in first episode psychosis programs, that's what we call it. And so, for me, I was like, fuck you and your recovery. why would you ever tell a young person that they can recover from schizophrenia when we don't actually know it exists? Why would you do that? That's like a really, it's like you've already created the box and you've handed the box to someone. Anyway. So this is one of the slides that I would use to train the peer workers. It's basically, I would say, okay, so on the left we have the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and all the young people in our program have been diagnosed with a non-affective psychotic disorder, aka schizophrenia, and that is what the psychiatrists have to go on to be able to understand what's going on with these young people. And then, this is in New York City, so on the other side of the world. I'd be like, I don't even know where this photograph is. I found it on the internet. I was like, this is a library in Europe, and I'd be like, there's like thousands of years of history and philosophy and music and art and all kinds of ways of thinking about like what is considered madness and psychosis, and you have all of that stuff. You have all that stuff, and so that's what happens when you hired me to work in the psychiatric system. Okay, so we're almost at the end here. So I wanna give props to. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of RAP, or Wellness Recovery Action Plan, but basically in my community, in the early years of the Icarus Project, do people know what an advance directive is? Advance directive. And for those of you who don't know, an advance directive is a document that you make in the event that you can't make decisions for yourself. So, like if you get into a car accident or something, and then you can't, and then you sign something in advance. It's like, don't hook me up to the machines. I don't want to be. That's an advance directive. But this idea of writing down what's important to you, in the event that you can't make decisions about it, or in the event that you're not thinking about it, can be incredibly useful if you struggle with mental health issues. The idea is that if you have clear language for yourself to talk about what it looks like when you're doing well, and then what it looks like when you're not doing well, and then what are the things you need to do to stay well, and who are the people who need to know this stuff, that can be incredibly useful. Going back to that earlier slide about crisis, for me at some point, I really came to the conclusion that so much of what we call mental health and mental illness actually has to do with communication. It has to do with how much we can talk about, like how we communicate with ourselves, like how we understand what's going on, and then how much we can communicate with each other. And for people who have a hard time communicating, that's the deal. That's how I think about it. I just don't believe this like brain chemistry thing. I mean, it's not like there aren't things that are different about us. It's not like I do believe I was born sensitive, you know? And I believe that there were traumatic things that happened to me along the way that like triggered stuff that made me the special guy that I am. But to say that that what I have is like a serious mental illness, I just laugh at them. I mean, I throw it back in their face because, and it's not like I don't struggle because I do, you know? And it's not like I'm not taking more fucking drugs right now so I can sleep because I have to do this tour, you know? Because I am. but like, I'm just someone who's like I figured out pretty well how to take care of myself, and I have to keep figuring it out because I'm gonna get older and I don't want to be on that lithium all these years. So I wrote a book a couple years ago called Maps to the Other Side: The Adventures of a Bipolar Cartographer, and that's like, for me, it was like super empowering and gratifying to be able to like write stuff down and share it with other people. That's really helpful to me. I don't know. Check out the book if you're interested. So this is a quote that I want to leave you with because I think that Martin Luther King is a civil rights activist from my country. And he has a lot of famous quotes. He's a very articulate man, but this is not one of his more famous quotes. This is a more obscure quote. And what he says is, "Human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted." And so what does that mean? Human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. What that means is that the people who are not normal, the people who are different, have a really important role in changing the world, in saving the world, is what he's saying. He was an orator, so that was his, that's the, so he's using it as like a grand narrative. But I would say, I don't know what keeps you all going, but part of what keeps me going is grand narratives, Like it's actually really important for me to believe that I am part of something much larger than myself, and that I'm part of a movement that is changing the world and touching people's lives. Like that's for my mental health. I need to have that feeling.